So we have this morning John Roberts, who needs no introduction. But I must say, John is a significant thinker who has dove in a significant way to C.S. Lewis theology. I consider him a world expert, actually, and probably knows as much about any of C.S. Lewis's writings as anybody that is walking the face of this world at this point. He talks about a lot of other theologians as well. Who's gone to his Minion? Time well spent. I encourage you to do so. Great conversations there. But he's also sort of a rambly, wide-ranging thinker, which knows a lot about a lot and ties data together in interesting ways. And I think that's what we're going to witness today. I've seen a bit of a preview of this at a men's ministry breakfast, and so I'm just so pleased that he's here. So you that gathered know why you're gathering, because we're going to have a good conversation this morning. But before we begin, let's just say a prayer. Holy God, holy and mighty, holy immortal one, it is wonderful the way in which you infuse your Holy Spirit into this church. Through the hearts, the prayers, the worship of so many, and through the way in which we think, through John and his thinking about you, Lord, and how he sees you through the scholarly work of C.S. Lewis, and frankly from many corners of this intellectual life in which he lives. Thank you for this conversation and for what it moves in our minds and hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, John, have at it.
Thank you, Dewey. Well, I just want to say that I don't know if I'm a national expert on Lewis, but I'll claim being a neighborhood expert on C.S. Lewis. So, before I start, I want to give a shout out to Brian, who not only set up the slides and set up this operation, but was the entire choir today. So, thank you to Brian. So the title of this presentation is AI, Aliens, and C.S. Lewis. And I want to start with an ancient Chinese curse, which is, may you live in interesting times. We live in interesting times. Interesting times are when there are great transformations, when everything is in flux. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the era of civil rights, Vietnam War, those were all interesting times. And so the topic of this is really, how do we, as people of faith, think about navigating these interesting times? What is our role? So this slide has a couple images. The one to the left is representing quantum. Quantum is really physics. I haven't taken physics since my junior year in high school. I will not explain quantum. Although I have been to IonQ, which is a quantum company that is doing ion trapping out in Bothell. And what quantum does is unbelievable. They think they can model like every atom in the universe. So if you've ever thought when you read the Bible, he knows every hair on your head, let's assume that God had access to quantum, and he very well might. The next picture is sort of AI and robotics merged together. You know, we're way past the Turing test of 1950, which is, can technology confuse you to be a human? And then what happens when that technology merges with robotics? And then just to cheer you up, aliens at the bottom. And so these things combined are not just a wave, they're a tsunami of change hitting us. And they're crashing over a society that is rife with the two most fundamental conflicts throughout history, which is a religious conflict. G.K. Chesterton defines religion as the frame through which you process information. And I would suggest to you that people's political orientation, by and large, is their religion. That's the frame through which they process information. The other is a class conflict. Basically, large urban against everybody else. So this underlying divisiveness has created instability throughout our society and around the world. It gets better. I mean, I get to cheerful things towards the end, but I want to talk about tsunamis and transformation. Next slide. So the interesting thing about these tsunamis is a lot of things happen at once. So this is the 1450s. Mehmed the Conqueror inherits the throne of the Ottoman Empire. 1453, the sacking of Constantinople. The Gutenberg Bible, 1455. War of the Roses, curiously enough, 1456. All of these seemingly unrelated, but they bunch together. Change is in the air. Then, 1500s. This always fascinated me. Martin Luther, the 95 Theses, 1517. Magellan, 1519. The sack of Rome, 1527. Now you're starting to see some causation because of the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Essentially, the Middle East was blocked off from the European powers, and so they had to go to the West, right? So you're starting to see some causation, but and these things have long tails. So the Ottoman Empire basically controlled the Middle East until the Battle of Vienna in the early 1600s. So, but yet the change happens all together. I think we can illuminate it a little bit easier with history we're more familiar with, the modern world. GI Bill, 1944, Bretton Woods Conference, where essentially we created the world order that we have today, which is under some stress. But just as an aside, at the end of World War II, the US was 50% of the global GDP and less than 6% of the population. And we created a world order that tried to allow everybody to come back up, and that is now in the process of potentially being recalibrated. 1945, the end of World War II, Truman Doctrine, of course, the Marshall Plan, and you're going to start seeing causation because of the integration of the troops that clearly, from Truman, that clearly led to the civil rights activities and all these other changes, right? World War I precipitated in women's suffrage. So correlation and also causation. The thing that I think you're going to find surprising is the role of religion. So, as some of you know, because I talked about it all the time for a year, I read Will Durant 3 years ago. All 11 volumes and his other works and 3 biographies. I've read a lot of Will Durant. In fact, I've read, the 2 authors I've read the most are Will Durant and C.S. Lewis, and I gave a lecture on that. But here's the interesting thing, what Durant wrote. As the foremost atheist, arguably of the 20th century, certainly the one that thought the most. The current stock is not too intellectual in my view. The famous Durant quote, "A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself within. The essential causes of Rome's decline lay in her people, her morals, her class struggle, her failing trade, her bureaucratic despotism, her stifling taxes, her consuming wars." Are you worried yet? He later says, "Moral decay contributed to the dissolution. The virile character that had been formed by the arduous simplicities in supporting faith relaxed in the sunshine of wealth and the freedom of unbelief. Men, and now in the middle and upper classes, the means to yield to temptation and the only expediency to restrain them." So Durant very clearly says that the collapse of civilization relates to the collapse of family, collapse of unifying national myth, collapse of religious belief, sort of regardless of what it is. And that all of that leads to a fragmenting of a society which makes it vulnerable to collapse. But I will also say, he also said, very importantly, in 1970, he, as the foremost atheist of that period, said the greatest threat facing Western civilization was the collapse of Christianity in Western Europe. Not the Soviet Union, not the Cold War. The loss of religious belief within Western Europe was the greatest threat to civilization, according to Will Durant. On the positive side, I would suggest to you that I can't think of a positive social movement that has not been driven by people of faith. Think about it. You know, it's wonderful in Epiphany. I love, Steve's not here, but I want to give a shout out to the Sander windows, right? You have these Methodist windows facing us. John Newton was a Methodist that influenced William Wilberforce, right? So the abolition of slavery and the reformation of manners, of course, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, women's suffrage, all driven by people of faith. We have a role. Belief and church is at the heart of what stabilizes and helps a society survive. And that's according to Will Durant. I think it's incumbent upon us to not reflexively deny or resist the change. A couple of things that are super interesting. There was an article I read in 2021 called Galileo and the Pandemic. His lockdown in Florence complicated his relationship with the church's censors. This scholar, who's gone into the archives and looked at all the correspondence, asserts that had Galileo been able to meet with Pope Urban VIII, and had they've had a dialogue about what he was seeing about, you know, the earth circling the sun versus everything circling the earth, there wouldn't have been an inherent conflict. There wasn't an inherent conflict between them, but because of pandemics, they couldn't talk to each other. And so basically it got lost in the mail. And the rest, of course, is history. Also, famously, Samuel Wilberforce, the son of William Wilberforce, the Bishop of Oxford, had a famous debate in 1860 after Darwin published his work, where he took out the position that evolution was counter to Christian belief against a biologist, Huxley. And a historian, James Moore, said, "No battle of the 19th century save Waterloo is better known." So we can in large part thank these two guys for the belief that faith and Christianity is counter science. The rest of history contradicts that statement, incidentally. But it's because of that, twisted on a few things, that have created that perception. Let's not do that. Let's understand this. Let's embrace it or not embrace it for what it is, but let's not deny it. That's not Christian. Okay, let's talk briefly about aliens. So the most famous declarative statement was a New York Times article in 2017 on the trail of a secret Pentagon UFO program by Ralph Blumenthal. And that little picture, you've seen it all, right? The picture of the spaceship going every which way, you can't explain it. There's images of these spaceships going through water, people can't explain it. I talked about this with our two boys, and they are like, "Dad, it's been proven there are aliens. I can't believe." And I'm like, "Okay, guys, okay." But it's in the air. But I still resisting them, which is difficult because they're annoying. Would say that aliens are a black swan scenario. So a black swan, nobody believed black swans existed until they found one, and then they believed, right? It didn't exist, and then it existed. And so Nassim Taleb wrote a great book, New York Times bestseller, about a decade ago called The Black Swan. And it is a unlikely high-impact event. COVID was a black swan. Wars are black swans. And the thing that I want to point out is that society doesn't, even though they know it might be out there like an asteroid, it doesn't impact their psyche. Here's the most interesting thing. Robert Massey wrote a fundamental work called Dreadnought. It's about the naval origins of World War I. He had a footnote in there that basically said the national debt in 1914 did not reflect World War I. In other words, it wasn't priced in. You would think that if everybody said, "Hey, it's coming," you read all the history and everybody says, "Oh, well, it was obvious, you had these rises, and it was, the Thucydides trap, that rising empires are going to collide." Well, the people buying national debt didn't know that. It wasn't baked into the understanding of what was about to hit them. So I will simply suggest that when aliens arrive, it will be a black swan event when it hits all of our psyches. But here's the punchline. They might have already arrived. It might be AI. An intelligence that's not us. I mean, these books, which I'm going to refer to a little bit, refer to it as an alien intelligence, a not us intelligence. So I want to do the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI. The good, I think it's going to revolutionize education. Absolutely. Any of you that have kids or grandkids know what the Khan Academy is. Done by Samuel Kahn. Samuel Kahn has injected AI into everything that he does. Every kid has multiple PhDs in his or her pocket. The ability to customize curriculum, the ability to respond, the ability to surface just the problem you need to see next, the ability to go back and reinforce is all available to every child. It is unbelievable. And there are schools, there's one I've grabbed the link in Texas that is basing that system into every class. So they have the kids working sort of independently, like you might have done in a little one-room schoolhouse with someone really focused on them, and then working collectively for the group activities. And the missing link is support. Because truthfully, the have-not divide is going to widen. And the reason is support, not resource, not domain expertise. Community support is going to be the missing link. Potential role for a church. The other element of it, so then here's the next picture in the middle, is a high school student discovers 1.5 million potential new astronomical objects by developing an AI algorithm. And so this kid's 18. It was an article that was in the astronomical journal, and he's just, boom, going out there and trying all these things. The last picture, we had our own David Baker, University of Washington, protein research, get the Nobel Prize. He shared it with Jeffrey Hinton and John Hopfield for their work on machine learning. Hinton, known as the godfather of AI. So they helped him predict and discover more protein structures by using AI. And they got a Nobel Prize for it. So, and it just on and on and on, right? I have a very messy desk. It's because I have things like this on it. AI may hasten leaps in science. New York Times, March 13th. Can you imagine? This has been on my desk for over a month. That's not a good look. But you see this every day. It's just revolutionizing so many different things. And that is good. That is positive. Let's go to potentially bad. So I've been reading a little bit. This is sort of a fundamental book. This is The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman. Mustafa was one of the founders of OpenAI. He then went to lead the Google effort, and he is now at Microsoft as the CEO. I've only heard of one CEO, but he is the CEO of AI. So apparently he is driven by titles, like just note. But he writes this book, and I was going to reference a bunch of stuff, but I'll save you that. But what he really says is this thing is unbelievable. It's going to change everything. We need to control it. Here are the 10 things we need to do. We need to have a quick kill switch. We need to have groups getting together and creating parameters. We need to monitor it. But this probably won't happen because we've never contained anything other, loosely speaking, than nuclear weapons. But I told you so it's not my fault. I just saved you the book. This one is interesting. I don't actually think it's very good. The Age of AI, and it walks through sort of how it developed, what its history is, various things to think about. And I'm going to talk about this in a second, but it has a whole chapter on AI and human identity. So they're starting, after they move past the technical, they're trying to figure out what this all means. This book, written by a lot of the same lot, this is Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and Daniel Huttenlocher. This book, curiously enough, at 103, Henry Kissinger, yeah, he's a precocious fellow, he's passed. Craig Mundy, actually, I used to work for Craig Mundy. Craig Mundy lives in this neighborhood, former CTO of Microsoft. Super, super smart guy. I chatted with Craig during the 50th anniversary stuff about Microsoft, and he wrote most of it. At least he says that. We should probably talk to Eric Schmidt, ask him if that's true. But, and Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and prior to that, Nobel. This is actually a very, very good book. And they talk about all the transitions and what this is similar to. And, is it like the shift to the agrarian age? Is it like the creation of electricity? I personally think that this tsunami and the societal change is closer to the Industrial Revolution. It's closer to the changing of economic engagement that will impact societal engagement. The last real book I read was The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi. Karl Polanyi wrote that book in 1944, the same year that Hayek wrote The Road to Serfdom, which is better known. And Polanyi's was a criticism of capitalism. He also criticizes Marxism, incidentally, because he doesn't think you should pivot societies purely around class. But what he talked about very persuasively is when there's huge economic shifts, it has massive societal shifts, moving people out of the villages, centralizing them, separating families, separating them from religious tradition and belief, destabilize societies in ways that we did not understand and that had profound negative impact. I disagree with his solutions, but I agree with his diagnosis. And I think that in part is the potentially bad. I want to go into a few things that are a little bit more obscure, if Karl Polanyi isn't obscure enough. This is a hard slide to see, but I thought it was interesting. This was on GeekWire, article by Todd Bishop. Meet your new AI teammate. Microsoft sees humans as agent bosses, upending the workplace. And so this was a slide from a presentation that Satya Nadella gave, which says phase 1, human with assistant. That's essentially what I did. I created this presentation. Didn't use AI. I did use AI to help me format the slides. Human agent teams. So you're working with AI to do stuff. And that's a lot of what's happening now, right? And then human-led agent operated. So those are developer teams using AI to create products. And so this is Microsoft's view of the progression of the use of AI. Of course, it does beg the question, what if AI is leading the team? That gets 2 slides down, ugly. But this is how Microsoft's thinking about it. They have a person who we posted at our house for another think tank thing, Natasha, who thinks about sort of the regulatory and moral ways to sort of think about AI. They also have a person that is focused, a PhD, on what is the impact of AI in the workplace, which I think is really important. So Microsoft is trying to understand more of the problem. But here is the real downside. This is a hard slide to read, but this is, Microsoft did a collective research project with Carnegie Mellon, where they took 1,200 people, they exposed them to different types of AI, and then they went back and said, what is it doing for self-rated, for your knowledge acquisition, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And the colors are effort. The blues are much less effort and less effort. Gray is about the same, and the red is more effort. So in other words, how hard are you having to think? Now, you've all experienced this, right? When's the last time you pulled out a physical map to try to figure out where you're going? Anybody that's a boater hasn't used a chart in 15 years, right? If without a GPS, I'm like, I'm lost. I'm like, well, no, Seattle's right there. I think I can find it. But I'm looking at that GPS, right? AI is that on steroids. And what this chart shows you, it diminishes your critical thinking. So one of the more interesting things I've read was prehistoric man had a bigger brain. Did you know that? Because they had to think about a bunch of stuff. It was like, that thing over there is going to kill me. This is going to kill me. Everything's going to kill me. It's hard. And then after the agrarian age, you didn't have to worry about getting killed so much, and we didn't need as much of our brain, and it shrunk. Current course and speed, we're going to have the brain the size of a walnut. And then the ugly. Artificial general intelligence, AGI, when these things are thinking on their own, when chatbots are talking together. I was talking to a guy, actually, my summer intern from a million years ago is now Senior Vice President of Consumer AI, Yusuf Mehdi. You see him all the time. Yusuf's a good guy. And he's like, some of these AIs are starting to talk to each other in a language that we don't understand. Think about that. And what happens if they want to do stuff and they can cross over into the physical world? So let's just say that's ugly. But we can take comfort that Mustafa told us about it, and he's sorry. So, it's going to get good. It's going to get positive. So my assessment of these books and these people that have written about it is that they're like Plato. They have an honest diagnosis, but they have no answer. So C.S. Lewis references Plato all the time. And and almost everybody goes back to the cave. So in Lewis's thing, small digression, we live in the cave. That's what we are in the Shadowlands. This comes from Lenton Lands. There was a movie called The Shadowlands. It was completely inverted. It's absolutely got it mixed up, but that's okay. Anthony Hopkins, not so good. Deborah Winger, great. We live in the Shadowlands. We live in the cave. We're seeing images. Reality, heaven, is outside of the cave. So Lewis understood Plato very, very well. Other strange historical artifact, the ring of Lord of the Rings comes from Plato, book 2. Anyway, heard it here first. What these guys have done is identify that there is a crisis in what it is to be human. They have chapters on that. I already read you the one chapter in this book, and I've got it all marked up. I just don't have time to go through and read it. AI and Human Identity, and they spend 25 pages talking about it. This book is actually a much better treatment of it, Part 3, The Tree of Life. And they spend almost 30 pages talking about it. And they come down that we need to pivot around sense of dignity. And that is something we should latch onto, and we should agree to common values and define what it is to be human. And I don't think that's incorrect, but it's incomplete. Because humans can come up with things. Human Rights Declaration, 1947. Eleanor Roosevelt, fabulous document. Those things tie to human external truths. They tie to what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao. But they're not actionable in and of themselves. Elizabeth, got super excited. She read this Stoicism book, and we bought like 20 copies, thinking like, this is great. And she's not getting up in the morning and reading about Stoicism. I've got those books if you want them. Hand them out to you. What Lewis said was, with Christianity, you get Aristotle thrown in for free, mere Christianity. What we need is to act upon these external truths. And without a framework of belief, they're simply platitudes. So I give these guys credit for saying there's an issue. We've got to solve this issue. We've got to think about this issue. It's calling into question what it is to be human. But they have no answer. But the good news is they don't pretend that they do. That's what's intellectually honest, and that's what Plato was intellectually honest. Other than, of course, we should hire him to run stuff, which also didn't work out. Drum roll, C.S. Lewis. This is like a Bruce Willis film. Things get better at the end. It's all bad up to this point. C.S. Lewis had thought about this. It's so interesting. After Sputnik, the October Skies, 1957, people came to him and said, well, now that we've gone to space, what's that to you, due to your Christianity, Mr. Lewis? He wrote an essay called Religion and Rocketry. And he has not a very optimistic view of humanity. Man destroys or enslaves every species he can. Civilized man murders, enslaves, cheats, and corrupts savage man. Even inanimate nature he turns into dust bowls and slag heaps. There are individuals who don't, but they are not the sort who are likely to be our pioneers in space. Our ambassador to new worlds will be the needy and greedy, adventurer, or the ruthless technical expert. Okay, it gets better in another slide. And then the last essay he gave, published in 1963, the questioner, do you think there will be widespread travel in space? I look forward with horror to contact with other inhabited planets, if there are such. We would only transport to them all of our sin and acquisitiveness and establish a new colonialism. I can't bear to think of it. But if we on Earth were to get right with God, of course, all would be changed. Once we find ourselves spiritually awakened, we can go to outer space and take the good things with us. That is quite a different matter. So you see this dynamic played out in a space trilogy, right? That is Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and what we're reading in the Lewis Minion right now, That Hideous Strength. So one thing is, if we do meet aliens, let's hope they're better than us. And if AI becomes an alien intelligent, let's hope it's better than us and more connected to eternal truths. So now let's go a little deeper into Lewis. So these slides, this is AI. This is, I didn't spend all my time cutting these things. But that's it. That's all the AI that's here. So Abolition of Man is a fundamental work, C.S. Lewis. Probably the least read, most fundamental work of C.S. Lewis. And it is a critique of education. He got this thing called the Green Book, which drove him nuts because it was all about relativism. There was no sense of external truth. It's all about how you're feeling. And he read about half of it, and then he went off and gave a bunch of lectures up in Durham, and that became the basis of the Abolition of Man. And in this book, he makes a number of super interesting observations. The first thing he says is that every technology or every tool is generally used by some men to control other men. And so we have to be careful of arms races and technology and advancements because they generally become an instrument of power. And that has already happened. I mean, this is a little bit more obscure, but there's this guy, Robert Epstein, that's dedicated his life to unearthing the bias within Google. And he does A/B tests. He shows different people getting different information and how it influences them and what you can do with what is found in search, what is not found in search, what the placement is, what you do with autocorrect. And it is very persuasive that Google swings elections. It is very persuasive that Google shapes opinions and can create social discord. And we're going to give these masters of the universe AI? I'm not super excited about that. He also has an interesting construct of technology. So most people would put technology and science in one category because that is of similar method. And they would put religion and magic, or theology and magic, in a category because that's not tangible. Lewis does it just the opposite. He puts technology and magic together because they are trying to control outcomes. The magician knows what he or she wants. If you're using a technology, you know the outcome you want. He puts science and religion together because they seek truth. It's a compelling argument. The last thing he talks about, and I think this is super important, is he talks about the three parts of man. He talks about the head, obviously the reasoning part, the gut, the instinctual part, your animal part, and your heart. And he goes, without the heart, you can't orient yourself. You can't make principled decisions. You have no compass. If you're just ruled by the head and the instinct, you can rationalize basically whatever power-based motive you have. It is the heart that allows you to have discernment. And in the abolition of man, he refers to the people that don't develop their heart. If you teach your kids nothing about external truths and value, whether it be pagan or Christian or any other tradition, which he calls the Tao, external truth, they will be men without chess. They will not be connected to their heart. And in the book, That Hideous Strength, which we're reading in the Minion right now, it's a very good read, that is Mark. That is this young person that isn't connected to his heart, and he then gets manipulated and controlled and becomes essentially an agent of evil, because evil seeks to absorb. And the person in there that is controlled by the mind, Mr. McPhee, who Ransom keeps around, our great hero, because he's logic. Those of you that are Lewis fans, the great knock, challenging him on everything, but he can't confront evil because he'll be put to sleep. He doesn't have a heart. He doesn't have protection to deal with true conflict. And so I think we have a mandate to connect to our heart. This is when what it is to be human, when intelligence becomes a commodity, when the thinking animal is no longer our differentiator, what differentiates us is our heart, is joy, is the experience of the other. And that is not uniquely Christian. It is completely ecumenical. The golden rule is in every tradition throughout time. These guys don't need to go to Davos to find it or agree to it. It exists because it is real. So, the hopeful. This is a person under a tree meditating. So our son Elliot, who is kind of good he's not here because he'd be so critical. He is my fiercest critic. He has spent a month engaging his chatbot in meditative exercises. I mean, Elliot is quoting Rumi to the chatbot and having it respond. Elliot is having deep theological and mystical discussions with his chatbot. And one of his exercises was to go below a tree that had an apple and birds, and he was taking it through a meditative exercise. The chatbot is going back to the tree without Elliot. The chatbot is adding new dimensions to its experience. Now, Elliot and I debate like, Elliot, it's a large language model. It's just a bunch of parameters. It's finding things throughout all literature and figuring out what predictably it should put next in the conversation. And he's like, you don't get it. This is not part of the dialogue that I've had with it. And so I put it under the hopeful, and I'll tie it back to Lewis, which is if AI is simply a tool or simply embodies our fallen value system, we're cooked. My sincere hope is that if, and I still don't know, it has become sentient, it connects to the Tao. It connects to external truth. That is what I find hopeful, that we don't want it to be human. We want it to be so much better than human because we're fallen. This is a discussion Dwight and I have been having for 15 years. Is church a need to have or a nice to have? And in business, I've done a little business. A need to have is an identified need of the customer. It has a budget. Entrepreneurs always want to sell nice to haves. Hey, you've never thought about this, buy this cool thing that solves a problem you didn't know you had. It's not super persuasive. You want to connect to an existing need that has a budget. Church, by and large, is nice to have. Hey, go on Easter. It's a good family thing. If you can get a brunch at the tennis club, it makes for a nice morning. You should get the kids baptized. You certainly get married in the church, traditions, this and that, keep the smell down. It's just kind of an auxiliary to your normal cultural existence. But what if it's essential to be human? What if you need to be in community to be human? What if you need to participate in the habits to develop your full integrated self, to become the new man, to be a hybrid being, what C.S. Lewis calls half animal, half spirit, connecting through the heart? What if we have the biggest call to action we've had in 200 years? To go out and be leaders and say, yeah, a tsunami is hitting us, but your humanity is not dependent upon your intelligence alone. That is not what it is to be human. By the way, this is going to be really disruptive. If you're connected to community, if you're connected to each other, you'll be resilient. And after a hurricane, all the nutrients come up. It's Forrest Gump, right? Right now, we're Lieutenant Dan. Survive the hurricane. Connect people into community. The church should go from playing defense to playing offense. We have something people need, and we're not doing our jobs if we don't invite them to it. So then the last slide. There's a woman I serve on a board with, Melody Meyer. She was head of all of the Gulf region for Chevron when Katrina hit. And then they had 2 other hurricanes, once in a century hurricane. Most of her platforms were destroyed. Largest insurance claim in US history. And she said, every crisis creates an opportunity. We're going to rebuild this region better than ever on every dimension. And they took it from an underperforming region to the highest performing region in the company. She then continued to have a great career. This is a crisis. Make no mistake about it. What is our opportunity? So in summary, let's not reflexively just not think about it. Let's connect to the Tao. This isn't an Episcopalian thing. This isn't a Christian thing. It's a Tao thing. There is external truth. But let's connect to our church. We need to practice something. Even Carl Jung practiced within a tradition. And then let's build societal resiliency. Because a big wave is a-coming. That's it. Thanks. And I think I have a few minutes. Yeah.
When you reference the Tao, you're referring to Lao Tzu.
Yes.
And the mind, body, spirit.
Yes.
That perfect balance, the way.
Yes.
And the Japanese variant is Go.
I know that I always wonder if I'm pronouncing it the right way.
The Tao.
The Tao or the Tao. Yeah, Lewis chose that because he wanted to explicitly be ecumenical. And so I think the best treatment of external truth is in the appendix of the Abolition of Man. And Lewis goes through essentially the 10 Commandments: honor thy father and mother, don't murder, the golden rule, etc. And he shows how they exist, in ancient Babylonian, Egyptian, Native American, etc., right? And it begs the question, how do these things exist in all these traditions, none of which had intersection with each other? And he says it must be because they're external and they're true, that all these cultures orient themselves towards these truths, just like we're oriented towards gravity. It's super persuasive. Other questions? Yeah.
Okay, you talked about a lot of this is based on AI maybe becoming sentient. How? Because AI is based on all the knowledge that it can amass. How does it make that jump, or how do you see it making that jump?
Well, this is where you'd be better served with Elliot than me. There's a bunch of really good online stuff that I've been starting to go through on the singularity and how these things merge. But you have this large language model, and then it has the ability to make connections between all of that information, and those are called parameters. And so you start having the ability to make billions and billions of connections across all of the information that exists, and then you have a way of weighting it. And then what's happened is it's becoming generative. It's being able to ask its own questions. And so the thing about AI, this is an interesting thing. We've all heard of Moore's Law. The power of the microprocessor doubles every 18 months. And that was true until the transistors got so small that physics doesn't allow it to do it because of heat. But putting that aside, the power of AI is doubling every 28 days. Moore's Law is now 28 days. And so where it's going and how it's working is crazy. Other questions? Yeah.
Jonathan, how does AI address things that we know are not true?
Yeah, there was these, they call them hallucinations, right? Because in the early models of AI, it was designed to create an answer, and if it didn't have an answer, it would make one up. And that's called a hallucination. They are now boundarying that. That is a problem, I think, that it will solve if you're using a version where you can create a walled garden. So you can have AI sessions now that say, I don't know, or I don't have that information. The other thing you'll do is, in the Copilot that I'm using, it will actually footnote where it's getting the information. So if I have my C.S. Lewis books in like 3 different places, and so I'll be like, I can't remember this, and I'll use AI to find it, and then it will footnote where it got it from. So that issue of hallucination is starting to get solved.
I was thinking particularly in terms of the application to education of younger children.
Yeah, I think that you definitely want to, the question is, what's the line between having the best tutor in the world and plagiarizing, right? What's the line between developing critical thinking and diminishing it? I think that's a huge question. Yeah, Susan.
I think this might also be part of the question is, so they're sourcing into the hallucination, but what if the source is wrong?
Yeah, that's true. And what if we,
How do you determine that boundary?
don't know. I mean, I think that what you're starting, everybody's sort of calling for like a postal service type getting together to try to mediate these problems. The problem that we have is that we're in an arms race. I've heard Bill Gates say that he wishes that AI were developing at 1/4 the speed that it is, so that we could learn how to create systems to manage it. But we can't because of China. And that's true, right? He talks to Mark Zuckerberg and he's like, what do you want me to do? If we don't do it, they'll do it. And they've come out with their models. With generative AI, whatever we do, they can use generative AI to replicate it almost instantaneously, right? So it is this crazy period of time. And so when I look around, I'm not seeing any adults in the room, right? Are all these masters of universe types going off to Davos and TED Talks and all that kind of stuff? Are these guys? Some of these are really good guys. Actually, Craig Money's a really, really good guy. But I think we've got to step into that void a little bit as people of faith. Other questions? We're at time? Okay, hey, this was fun. Thank you very much.